Thanks for joining us on the tour. I'm your host, Michelle Cortens, the tree fruit specialist at Perennia. Today's stop is at Chris Growers, so let's go find Henry.
Hello, my name is Henry Van Ostrom. I'd like to welcome everyone here to Chris Growers Farm in Morristown, Nova Scotia. Right now we're growing about 250 or 260 acres of apples, predominantly Honeycrisp. I think we've got around 160 or 170 acres of Honeycrisp. Today we're standing in a block of Galas on M9, planted at 12 feet row spacing and the 2.5 feet in the row. And I guess we're going to talk a little bit about hedging today. Now, I certainly don't claim to be an expert on hedging, but I do have some thoughts and ideas on the topic, and Michelle has asked me to share those with you, so that's what I'm going to try to do today.
So tell me about when you do the hedging.
In this particular block, we've hedged it, or I should say we've hedged the sides twice, both times in the dormant, once in 2019 and once in March just past. The tops have been hedged only once, and that was just prior to pink of this year. They were fairly tall, so we cut quite a bit off, so I wanted to wait a little bit to sort of slow down that regrowth a little bit so we didn't have to fight as much excessive vigor in the tops of the trees. Now, the main reason we didn't hedge any earlier than 2019 on this 2014 planting was that I was waiting for a lot of the limbs to come down. Find when a young tree is growing, it tends to grow fairly upright limbs, and I wanted to wait till the crop brought the majority of those limbs down so we would end up with limbs that were more horizontal rather than vertical. I find the limbs that are more vertical, like this one, tend to block a lot of sunlight penetration, whereas if you have limbs that are a little more horizontal like this, you get better light penetration. So I was basically just waiting for limbs to come down so that the majority of them were more horizontal.
So why are you thinking of starting to do summer hedging?
Well, depending on the block and how much growth you have in it, I'd like to, like to get what they talk about. If you summer hedge, you can get an apple on the edge of that limb and slow that growth down. So if you have a block that has excessive growth in it, that's kind of one way to try to slow that and control that growth.
Okay. Yeah. And do you have any concerns when you're about to do that summer hedging? Like, are you afraid of damaging the fruit? Are you afraid of fire blight?
I'm not too worried about damaging the fruit. It's really out there farther than I really wanted anyway. As far as fire blight goes, yes, I'm very concerned about that. Definitely going to be doing it when it's dry and stay out of blocks that do have, any amount of fire blight in them. We do have some fire blight on the farm, and knock on wood, fortunately, it hasn't been a really big issue for us yet, but it's definitely a concern.
Okay. Okay, so looking at these trees, just tell me a bit about the limbs after you did the earlier hedging. What kind of limbs do you like to see when you look at the tree?
Well, like I said, I like to see more horizontal limbs, like these limbs here. I don't like to see these vertical limbs, again, because they obstruct light penetration too much. I think hedging is just one of the tools you use to try to get your orchard or your trees into the shape that you want them to be. And we've gone through in a lot of cases and we've removed some of the bigger upright limbs, leave some of the medium to small limbs, and then when they come down we hedge. Especially the first time we hedged, we ended up with a lot of upright growth on the ends, and then we went stuff like this or this. We went back through and summer pruned the more upright ones, again, to help with that light penetration. So that's basically what we've been doing here so far.
Okay. And you're pretty happy with the process?
Yes, I'm very happy with it. I mean, had some concerns about some things about, just randomly cutting limbs off at the ends, but like I said, they throw out a bunch of side shoots. If you want, you can cut that dead piece off next year in the dormant and remove some of those other limbs. I also find this gives me like an option to sort of point the limb in the direction I want it to, because usually you get 2 or 3 different limbs coming out in different directions. Like I said, we usually remove the upright one, but then I can choose which one I want to leave to try to get that limb to grow into a more open space to kind of use as much sunlight as you can.
Okay. So is there anything else you want to add here?
Let me think about that for a second. Yeah, I guess I do want to add something else. They talked about getting quite an improvement in how fast you could prune when you hedge, and I was a little skeptical on that. But I think I found pretty much the same thing as what everybody else does. Once you hedge, it makes your pruners that much more efficient, and I'm not sure why that is. I guess they don't have as many decisions to make because a lot of the decisions are already made for them, and they just have to deal with what's left. So they can seem to go through blocks quite a bit faster.
Okay.
So I really do enjoy that part of it. This year too, well, both of the last 2 years we struggled with manpower, especially in the pruning season because of COVID issues. And with hedging, you cover a lot of acres. It's not the be all and end all, but like I said, it is a tool that can really help speed things up, and we definitely needed that the last couple of years.
Okay, great. Well, let's move on to the next stop then. Okay, we're at the same planting still, and we're gonna switch focus and just talk about sizing on the Gala now. So, how are you managing Gala to produce larger fruit sizes?
Not very well, actually. Still working at that. There's a few things I tried to do. Like I said, I tried to get the Gala to grow on limbs that are, I like the size of my pinky or about that size. I find if you get the limbs too small, they get pendant and the fruit gets smaller. I find if the limbs stay more horizontal, you have a rather larger limb, then the sap seems to come up through there enough to get the apples to be bigger, and it keeps the limb from going pendant. This is the first year I've played around a little bit with some blossom thinners. Not really sure. Didn't really think that they did a whole lot at the time. Couldn't really tell a whole lot of difference between what we blossom thinned and what we didn't blossom thin at the time we were deciding to put on our 7 and acid. But I'm thinking now I have to relook at that, because I think that where we did put on the blossom thinners, more came off with the acid and the 7. But I still have to look at that a little closer and double check that. But I'm trying to get some apples off early and increase the size. I think we're trying to make sure we get in and thin the Galas fairly early in the year, so that they have more time to size up. Try to space them out a little farther on the tree. Be fairly aggressive with our 7 and our acid, which can be dangerous. As you can see here, we did knock a lot of fruit off. We have already been through here hand thinning, so what's here is going to basically be what we pick. I have heard that some guys talk about water being able to help Galas grow quite a bit. In Nova Scotia, for the most part, people don't believe that irrigation pays for itself, and I think maybe for the most part that's true, but I think that with Gala, and especially in our soil types, I do believe that irrigation is going to be beneficial, although we haven't been able to do a whole lot of irrigating yet. We're working towards it. We've got trickle line under here now, and we're trying to get it set up with some headers so that if it does get dry, we'll be able to get some water on these things.
Okay. So about how many fruit are you shooting for per tree here?
I guess I haven't really done the math on that. I look at more at the spacing of the fruit. I want them to be basically a fist width apart, and I find if I have the right number of limbs in the tree and I space them out like that, that I pretty much end up with the number that I need anyway. Maybe we have spots where we could thin these out a little bit, but like I said, due to COVID, we really have just been trying to do the bare bones, get through as many blocks as we can doing something, rather than do a real good job on a couple blocks and everything else getting left alone. So
okay. So what would you like to try next in this block?
I'm not really sure what I'd like to try. I think what I want to do is I want to talk to more people and see what they're doing and see who's getting the most success, growing bigger Galas, and find out exactly what their formula is and sort of rob that, or at least parts of it, and try that. But I've thought a little bit about Maxell, and some people have a little bit of success with that. So there's a couple things on my mind, but nothing really that's glaring that I want to try, except for, like I said, keep talking to people and keep trying to learn, what's the most economic way to get bigger galas.
Okay. So anything else you want to share about sizing on Gala?
No, I think I said pretty much everything. Like I said, I think getting some fruit off early and then going back in and touching it up early with hand thinning is a big part of it. And
Okay.
when I know more, then maybe I can add more.
Yeah. You did mention you tried blossom thinning. What time did you put that on?
I think we were a little bit late. I was planning on going earlier, but then I started hearing some stories about you should be waiting 4 to 5 days, depending on, well, up to 4 to 5 days, depending on the weather. And the weather was, a little bit cool at that time. We had a couple real hot days, and then it cooled off. So hard to say exactly, for your first time trying it, what you want to do. So I definitely didn't want to go in and spray everything off. I've done that before with other years, and I don't want to do it again. So
okay, at this stop we're going to be talking about irrigation. So can you tell us why you decided to put this system in?
I guess that's a bit of a lengthy explanation, because there's kind of a thought process that goes behind that, because it's not cheap. So you don't want to just say, oh, I'm going to put it in. If you don't think you need it, maybe you shouldn't. But I think I was listening to Terrence Robinson one time, and he was talking about in New York, he felt that irrigation only actually, you could see a difference once every 10 years. But he also said that he believed that in a lot of cases it was worthwhile to have it in the first 3 years to establish that tree. That made a lot of sense to me, but I guess it also depends on the soil type you're on. If you have really good soil, has good water holding capacity, then maybe you can get away without it, unless it's a really, really dry year. In this particular block, it's fairly gravelly and fairly sandy, and really sandy in some spots, so we decided that it would be worthwhile to put in. I think even if not for just the initial tree growth long term, I think it should pay for itself, because I think it's not only the size of the fruit in any particular year, it's also that do you keep that tree healthy enough so that you get bud formation for the following year. I think that's also something that should be considered. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we've done here and sort of why. I think the first thing you should do is, learn a lot about irrigation. I didn't know very much about irrigation before we got started here, so I needed to do some homework, do some research, talk to people who know about irrigation, and figure out what you have to do. For instance, we're using HDPE pipe, and it's all fused, so all these joints here you see is where the pipe was put together. This was a T, and it was welded onto a piece of pipe, which is welded on to a flange for the pressure reducing valve. I like HDPE because once you weld it, it's as strong as the pipe, so there's no reinforcing corners or having to worry about things blowing apart, or at least that's what I hope so. But we still haven't installed this pressure reducing valve to drop the pressure of the water down to something that our pipe can sustain, because it's rated for 125 psi, but we're pumping from a pond that's at a higher elevation, so we're increasing psi as we're coming downhill. So this pressure reducing valve drops it down to about 40 pounds, which is enough pressure to sustain this particular block, plus this pipe goes down and does another lower block, and we get increased pressure as we go down there as well. So we've also got pressure relief valve here, just in case we get a sudden spike, to blow that off, and there's a vent here which is supposed to help this pressure reducing valve work properly, is because there's any air pockets in the air, that takes that out, and the pressure reducing valve doesn't have to deal with that. So this block is about 70 acres in total. Well, the whole block is 70 acres in total. It's divided up into 6 zones, I think, and we can do, with a 500 gallon per minute pump, we can do 3 zones at a time, so it's only 2 days to irrigate the whole block, and we can turn each zone off with a valve at the start of each zone. If we did want to isolate any particular rows for whatever reason, there are shutoffs at the start of every row that we can shut off particular areas if we want to. Don't know if I have anything else to add to that or not.
Okay. Well, how about like the ponds? Have they been able to keep up?
Yeah, it's been a kind of a learning process and a growth process too. Last year was the first year we really did any amount of irrigating, and it didn't take us too long to empty the pond, so then we had to dig a bigger pond, and then this year we irrigated more, and we still pumped the pond dry and are looking to find a way to refill that from a nearby brook. So there's lots of things to deal with, lots of things to think about, and it's, for us at least, it's been a bit of a process to go through, but I think long term it's going to be worthwhile. We can't really say that we can or can't see a difference because we don't have enough spots, and we haven't been doing it, or I shouldn't say we don't have enough spots that we are not irrigating. There are a couple rows in here that don't have irrigation on them. But like I say, it's only 2 years. Last year we really didn't get enough water on early enough to really do a whole lot of good. I think in some spots we can say, yeah, this looks better here, but we didn't get the whole block irrigated, so it's hard to draw any conclusions from that. And then this year we did irrigate everything twice when it was dry earlier, but then we've had a fair bit of rain since then, so if the tree comes under stress, it's really too late, so we haven't really seen any stress this year. Last year we did, but by then it was too late, and you put irrigation on it. I don't think it helps that much if the leaves are already wilting. You've kind of missed the boat as far as trying to get that tree to continue to grow.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks for telling us about irrigation here.
You're welcome.
Okay, at this stop now, we're going to talk about the new Captan restrictions that we're dealing with this year. So, Henry, tell us what you've been dealing with.
Well, it's been a real challenge. I mean, I think everybody knows the difference in the label from what we used to be able to do to what we can do now, and it almost makes it so it's, you know, it's very hard to use Maestro or Captan now because unless you know exactly what you're going to do in every block, which I can't seem to figure out. I don't know if I'm going to summer prune a block, or, I mean, once I get it thin, then I think, okay, once I get that block thinned, I can go in and use some Maestro in there, and then I realize, oh, maybe I need to tie the tops up, or need to put U-clips on, or I want to summer prune a block, and then gee, I might want to do that, so then I can't use Maestro. So it's a real challenge. We're forced to use other products that we're not comfortable with that in controlling our summer rot diseases, and you're just trying to get by and keep your fingers crossed and hope you don't get burned too bad. But it's definitely a real challenge. I find in either high density or semi-dwarf trees or lower density plantings, because you know, for us, we're still in the stage of, you know, our trees are still growing, and it's not like they're there and all we have to do is hand thin them and walk away from them and maybe summer prune later, like we're doing tree tying and tree training and stuff like that. So we're going through the blocks more often, so it's harder to get back in there if you're using Maestro. So it's a real challenge, that's for sure.
Right, that makes sense. So what kind of products have you been using instead this year?
Been using mostly Allegro. Of course, we're pushing Manzate as far as we can as well earlier in the season. We've got a little bit of full pan, but so we're kind of saving that for when we really need it, because the availability of that product is quite limited this year. I guess, yeah, that's about it. Allegro and Manzate. We've used some Maestro in blocks that we've hand thinned, or we're not going to go in. Of course, using Manzate quite a bit in younger blocks that aren't producing, and just trying to get by.
Okay. So how about, you mentioned the summer rots. Have you had issues with those in the past? Are you concerned about issues showing up?
Oh, definitely concerned about issues showing up. We've had, you know, minor issues in the past, nothing that's really, you know, glaring, no blocks that you say, okay, we really got to do something about this block. Always seem to have a little bit of it, but, you know, nothing that's going to show up on your packet that's going to drop your packet a whole lot that makes you really address the problem next year. We've, you know, always tried to do some sprays for summer rots, so we seem to be able to do a decent job holding that in check, but definitely nervous this year.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So even though Captan can be applied 10 times on these high density plantings, you find it's just difficult to work with.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. I don't think we've even put one on the majority of our plantings yet.
Wow.
Just because I have to hand thin it, or I know I'm going to go back in there and tree tie or tree train or bend limbs down or do something. So it always, for the most part, always seems to be something there in these young plantings that makes me go, geez, maybe I better not put a maestro in there. So we've only have probably less than 10% of our high density orchard has a maestro on it at this point.
Okay. And any low density orchard, have you put Captan in?
For a low density orchard, I'm going to say probably about the same. About 10% has one maestro on it. Again, we're hand thinning some of those blocks, so I can't go in there with a maestro. We want to save at least one maestro for closer to harvest, so that really only gives me one more to use. So I'm really trying to pick and choose on when I'm going to use that. And then, like I said, that's kind of dictated by what else I'm doing in that block. Like even if I've got to go in and cut low limbs to get the weed sprayer through, well then I've got to be mindful of that as well. There's just, you don't really realize how often you go through your orchard until all of a sudden you say, well, I can't go through it for 14 days or 25 days or whatever it is in any particular block. That you got to plan a long ways ahead, and it's hard to do that, with so many different blocks on the go and so many different jobs to do in each block. It's a real challenge.
Yeah. Well, you're definitely not alone. I think these re-entries and even the pre-harvest intervals sometimes have been really limiting. So thanks for sharing your thoughts on that.
You're welcome.
Great. And thanks for having us on the tour. I'll give you a round of applause from everybody else who couldn't be here, but I really appreciate you sharing all your information.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.